这一集的主题是如何知道一只股票是否好的投资，贵的就不应该买吗？这是关于巴菲特过去买可口可乐的其中一些范例。
How do you make investments? How do you know something's a great idea or not? And I thought what I'd do is I'd take the example of one investment that Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger made, which was the investment in Coca-Cola. And I wanted to go through the models they used when they made this investment. So there was no spreadsheet ever created when they did the Koch investment. From then till today, it's been about almost 30 years since they made the investment. They have no analysts or associates or anyone who helps them. I don't even believe they made much in terms of notes when they made the investment, but they thought very deeply about it. And for most investments, if you can't do the math in your head, then it should be an automatic pass. So there was no DCF model run for Coke. There was no numbers-based models. I mean, they had some numbers in their mind, but I don't think they ever reduced them to paper. But they did have, I think, and I may be missing some of them, but I think there were dozens upon dozens of models that they used in making the investment. And what happens is that when you have an overlay between models, that's when you get what Charlie Munger calls Lollapalooza effects. 1 + 1 becomes 11. And so it's really kind of the interplay between the models that lead to kind of the aha moment and such. So Charlie Munger had given a speech to a group that basically elected to be secret. They told him not to disclose the name of the group that he gave that speech to. And after he gave the speech, where part of the speech covered the Koch investment, they told him it was a useless speech. And so they didn't appreciate it. And I actually think it's one of his more brilliant speeches, and actually it gives you a window into how they think. So I think it's useful. So anyway, the Koch investment that Berkshire Hathaway made was made between 1988 and 1990, about a 3-year period when they bought the stock. And at the time, they invested about $1.3 billion into Koch, and $1.3 billion at that time was approximately 1/4 of the book value of Berkshire Hathaway. So they made a very significant bet. I mean, you think of an insurance company taking 1/4 of their equity into a single stock, and that's what they did at the time. And the last bit of Coke that Warren bought in 1990 was bought at about 25 times trailing earnings. So it wasn't cheap by traditional metrics that you might use. But on many fronts, they considered a no-brainer, and obviously they've now not touched that position for almost approaching 30 years. And I don't think they're going to touch that position even well after Warren and Charlie are gone from the scene. So I don't think the Koch position is going to get touched at Berkshire for a very long time. So why did they make the investment, right? And what went through their minds to make the investment? And so one of the things that Warren and Charlie have said is that if they had not invested in See's Candy, they would have never, ever invested in Coke. So to understand the Coke investment, we should go back to the See's Candy investment, because that'll give us some clues. So in 1972, they bought See's Candy. And how many of you are customers of See's? Have you ever had See's Candy? How many of you have never had See's Candy? We have a few unfortunate humans. Maybe you can, next time you're going through some airport, get some peanut butter brittle. That might be a good start. But anyway, so they bought See's in 72. And in 72, they bought See's for $25 million. And the deal almost didn't happen because the family that was selling wanted $30 million for the company, and Warren was already choking at $25 million. He thought the $25 million price was really rich. And the reason why Warren thought $25 million was rich was See's was a company that at the time was generating about $2 million a year in cash flow. They had $8 million in net book value, and the purchase price was $25 million. So they were paying more than 3 times book value for the business. And when the family said they wanted $30 million, Warren just said that, hey, at $25 million and 1 cent, I'm out of here. So you can either take the $25 million or we'll walk. And they're very grateful that the family didn't walk and sold them the business for $25 million. And 12 years later, in 1984, See's was earning $13 million. So in 72, when they bought it, it was making $2 million. In 84, 12 years later, it was making $13 million. The book value had gone from $8 million to $20 million. And the unit volume over that 12-year period had only gone up by about 2% a year on average. So if you look at the See's Candy purchase from 1972 and take it all the way till today, the unit volume growth of See's has been about approximately 2%. The number of pounds of candy they sell every year has gone up about 2% a year over the last, let's say, 45 years or 44 years or so. But their earnings have gone up significantly more than that. It's a private company. They don't disclose the numbers. I would guess that See's is probably approaching 100 million, maybe somewhere in the 70 to 100 million, maybe even more than that, in terms of earnings per year at this point. And California GDP from 72 till now has gone up at probably 5 or 6% a year. So See's did not keep up with California GDP growth over that period from a volume growth perspective. And in fact, even the 2% volume growth that has come in with square footage increase. So their retail space went up by approximately that number, which led to that growth. And Warren and Charlie say that the river of cash that came out of See's funded a zillion other things at Berkshire. So they would, if you ask them today, what is the value of See's to Berkshire, they probably couldn't even tell you, but it would be in the tens of billions. It would be very significant in terms of what it did. And if you were to ask them today that, so Charlie says that we were barely smart enough in 1972 to buy See's, barely smart enough, because he says that, if the family didn't budge to our stupid demand of 25 million, we would have walked. And actually, if you go backwards and think about it, they could have paid 100 million for that business, and it would have been a low price based on what happened after that, right? So it was a phenomenal business. And the only thing Warren did, the only input he provided to management, they kept the same management. Chuck Huggins kept running the company. The only thing he did was he said that on January 1st of every year, I will send you the new price list. So he took over pricing for the company. So, all their peanut butter brittle and all their fudge pricing and everything else. Beginning of the year, Warren would look at, inflation is 3%. Let's bump all the prices by 12%. And year after year, what he found is that they could raise prices significantly above the rate of inflation, and it didn't have any negative impact on sales. Sales just kept going. But they also found out a few other things. They got a huge education in brands and branding. And that education in brands and branding was very fundamental to the Coke purchase. So See's is a California phenomena. People in California, if I had the same talk going on at Columbia University or something and I asked the same question, they'd look at me like I was from Mars. They probably never heard of See's except for the few that had gone to Omaha. So they repeatedly tried, and Warren and Charlie occasionally would try to nudge management to expand See's into other geographies. And every time they tried to expand to other geographies, they would fall flat on their face. So they'd open a store. I think one time they had a store in Chicago, never worked. They've opened stores in several geographies, it's never worked. But slow expansion in California has worked. And so they found that the brand had certain brand value in California. They also found that people were willing to pay a premium for See's candies in California, but that same cachet didn't follow through in other locations. So when the Coke idea came in front of them, there were a couple of things that were different about Coke from See's. The first thing was that Coke traveled really well, and they could see that. So they had repeatedly tried to take this brand into even the neighboring states. They couldn't do that. There are only 2 countries today in the world where you cannot get Coke. And I forget, there's North Korea is one of them. I forget what's the second. Pardon? Yeah, Cuba, that's right. So Cuba and North Korea are the only 2 countries where you cannot get Coke today, right? But what they noticed is that even in these 2 countries, if Coke tomorrow started selling in these countries with no advertising, it would take off in quite a significant way, because it's, that brand has meaning even to people who have never drunk Coke before and never seen an ad, because it's so much part of pop culture and movies and whatnot that it's entrenched. So basically what they found is that unlike See's, Coke traveled really well. And Warren studied this phenomena of the difficulty of traveling with See's very carefully, because he was very interested in making See's global. He would have loved for See's to become a global company. And with all the brain power they had, they could never do that. But here was a company that was naturally a global company. The second thing he noticed that was different between See's and Coke, so he's been drinking 5 Cokes a day since he was 6 years old. And so, Coke's been a regular part of his diet for like 80 years or something. And so the second thing he noticed was that there was a limit to the amount of fudge you could eat. So as you eat more fudge or See's candy, your ability to eat more of it declines. But with Coke, the lack of an aftertaste means that the ability to consume Coke was quite significantly higher than the ability to consume candy. In fact, a person can consume 5 or 6 Cokes a day pretty much for their whole lives without really feeling like they were having something monotonous. And many of us do that. How many of you have 1 or more Coke products daily? No one admits to having Cokes. So actually you're having other Coke products, you just don't recognize that they're made by the company. They've got like over 100 brands. So the second thing they recognized was that unlike fudge and peanut butter brittle and such, that you couldn't, Coke, you had no aftertaste, and so the volume you could consume and the frequency with which you consume it was quite different. And in fact, even if you compare it to something like McDonald's, which is a very good model, but if you were eating at McDonald's every day, that could probably get to you much faster than consuming Cokes every day. So they noticed that this particular product has this nuance of recurring consumption not really being an issue in terms of purchase. So these were some of the models that they knew about before they started to research Coke. And the third thing they also recognized difference between See's and Coke was with See's, you needed retail space, right? So they had to have a See's store and pay rent and all these things to sell it. But Coke got sold in all these places where the company didn't pay any rent. It was just sold all over the place. So it had And I'll go through a little more details about the kind of the capital light model of Coke. So there were a number of reasons why Coke was very capital efficient, far more capital efficient than even See's was. So even though See's in '84 was producing 13 million on 20 million invested capital, I mean, that's a very high return, 65% return on invested capital, really good business. Coke was even better than that. It was a truly remarkable business. And so then the second part of the mental models that come in is that Warren and Charlie like to go through long histories of these companies that they study. So with Coke, both of them read every annual report since the company was public. So they read every annual report from 1919, which is when Coke went public, until the late 80s, every single annual report. And they got some insights from reading those annual reports. And one of the insights they got was that from the period of 1919 to, let's say, 87, there had never been a year when Coke's unit or cases sold was lower than the previous year. So through the Great Depression, through the Second World War, through the Korean War, through all the stagflation of the 70s, through all of that, unit case volume just every single year went up over the previous year, nonstop. And the second thing that they noticed was that Coke, which started in Rome, Georgia, went through this major international expansion. So they were repeatedly over the years. They were first only in the southern U.S., then they kind of spread out through the U.S. and then Canada, and then they started spreading out. And in fact, World War II took them to all the places where the U.S. Army went. And so they saw the whole way Coke entered one new country after another, and what happened after they entered the country. So they could see that from the reading of those reports. And what they concluded was that the runway was really long. And I'll get to the runway. So the way they defined the runway from reading Coke is that humans need to ingest water to survive, right? So we need to ingest about 64 ounces of water a day to survive. And humans prefer to consume flavored water over plain water. So at least some portion of that 64 ounces, they prefer to consume flavored versus plain. In fact, Warren's daughter says that she's never ever seen her dad drink water. She says she's never seen her dad drink a bottle of water or drink a glass of water. Never happened. And so Warren, I think, 40 ounces a day is coming from Coke. I don't know where the other 24 ounces are coming from, but she says water is not part of the deal. And so if you take the 64 ounces that humans have to drink, they figured that at infinity, you'd probably get to something like 50% of that volume gets consumed in one way or another in a flavored format. And you can take that today where if you look at something like Dasani, which is a Coke brand for water, as part of that, so some kind of bottled beverage becomes about half of it. And they felt that Coke could probably take 50% of the of half of the flavored portion. So 16 ounces per day per person, which is 2 servings. And so they just looked at the unit volume, they looked at the number of servings, they looked at the number of humans, and they looked at that runway, and they said that we've got a long ways to go here. And so you've got basically this distribution engine where you can pump a lot of brands through it, Minute Maid and Monster and all these things. And world population was growing. So as world population grew, Coke consumption would grow. GDP was growing in countries where GDP is very low. So if you look at a country like Mexico, for example, the per capita Coke consumption in Mexico is the highest in the world. It's above the U.S. And there are other countries in the world where they're at 1/100th of Mexico's volume. So Coke would grow as it went into new countries. It would grow as GDP grew. It would grow as per capita consumption grew. And so that was another part of what they learned from reading those annual reports. And then Warren read this Fortune article, which was written in 1938, about Coke. And the writer of the Fortune article said that, this is a marvelous, marvelous company in 1938, has done so well. And then he said, well, of course, the ride's over because the company went public in 1919 at $40 a share, and now that is worth $3,300 per share if you go back to the stock splits and all that. So they said, the writer of that article said, it's great to know that, but the ride's over. And Warren says the ride was not over because if in 1938 you invested a fresh $40 into Coke, by 1993 it was $25,000. So you could have missed the first 20 years, and you still had runway after that. And so another model they used was they didn't have an anchoring bias. A lot of times in investing, what happens, and in fact I'm very guilty of that, is we tend to look at kind of past performance of a security, and that taints the way we look at it. And actually what you really ought to do is ignore the past, just focus on the future. And so they were really good at not having this bias about, hey, this company's been growing from 1884 till 100 plus years. Now we want to invest in it, and 100 years after this company got formed, we're putting 1/4 of our capital in. Have we lost it? They didn't think about it that way. And then some of the other things they realized is that the company was currency proof. It was asteroid proof. It was thermonuclear blast proof. It was anarchy proof. It was pretty much bulletproof from any way you look at it. So if you think about a situation where you have, let's say, a LE, extinction level event, take place, right? So let's say an asteroid comes in, and let's say the asteroid takes out 6.5 out of the 7 billion humans. Let's say we're left with a few hundred million. Well, the Coca-Cola company has the trademark, and they have the formula, and they will eventually start producing Coke again, and they will probably get back into business and such. And you could not say that about almost any other business when you have that sort of an event takes place. And so even if currencies changed or got devalued or whatever happened, Warren's perspective was that people would be willing to trade 2 minutes of labor for a Coke. And so the trading of labor versus Coke would be independent of currency. So that was another part of the model. And then the notion that our mouths are a very personal space, right? There's a few spaces humans have kind of are very sensitive about. Mouth is one of them. And we're kind of sensitive about what we put into our mouths. And so if you see a Coke and you've had it in the past, etc., you won't think twice, and even if you're in a different country, you'll have it, no problem. But if you see some kind of unknown brand, it's kind of like, you eat Wrigley's chewing gum, and then someone presents to you Glott's chewing gum, and says, would you like some? You're probably not going to take it. And so our mouth is a very personal space, and we're not going to be messing around with trying to take the low bid on what goes into our mouth. So they felt that we are creatures of habit. Once we get these habits formed, then we're not going to be willing to change them, especially with personal spaces like our mouth. And the second is about humans are creatures of habit. Like we'll shave every day on the same side of the face first, or in the case of ladies, the same leg first. We do things in a certain pattern. And again, once we get to those habits and patterns, we are reluctant to make those changes. So they saw all these things, and they saw all of this was kind of coming together from their reading of the annual reports. And then they looked at the, so I have already probably gone through maybe 20 or 30 different models they used. We still have a lot more to go. There's a lot of more models they went through. But in all the models that I've gone through with you, we haven't talked about any numbers. You see, so I went through all this stuff about it being a great investment. We haven't talked about numbers really.